This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for March 14th, Pi Day, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Happy Pi Day.
And producer Pat.
Hi everyone.
We have a great show for you today. Adam is going to give us the skinny on gossip. And then Christina is going to explore school buses versus seatbelts. But first, Pat is going to give us a story about Nintendo Switch cartridges and flavor tripping.
So a couple of days ago, I had pretty much finished putting together a segment for TRC based on a listener request to talk about the difference between the word theory in everyday language and the use of the word theory when we talk about science. Fear not, Maria, I'll still cover this on an upcoming show, but yesterday I went down these two seemingly unrelated rabbit holes, and I wanted to talk about that today instead. Okay, so story time. I am a Nintendo guy. In particular, I'm a fan of Super Mario and Donkey Kong games. We have a Wii U, but the newest console, the Nintendo Switch, is now out, so of course I'm interested in getting one. Christina, you were lucky enough to go to the media launch party for the Switch. What did you think?
Oh, it was pretty awesome. More importantly, our son was over the moon playing Zelda for 20 minutes for the first time.
Yeah, that game sounds kind of fantastic. I have a few friends that are playing it.
So I was doing some research about backward compatibility with Wii U games and quickly found out that the games for the new system come on cartridges rather than discs. The cartridges look sort of like a slightly larger SD card, and then I stumbled on the first of two really weird things. Several people talking about how bad the cartridges taste.
Oh, no.
Have you heard about this, Adam?
I have absolutely heard about this.
Okay.
I haven't heard about this at all, so I'm very intrigued.
I just want to lick a cartridge when I get one to see if it's true.
Right. So this rumor seems to have been started by game journalist Jeff Gerstmann, who, while checking out the new console for a review, decided to stick one of the cartridges in his mouth. On February 24th, he tweeted the following. I put that Switch card in my mouth, and I'm not sure what those things are made of, but I can still taste it. Do not try this at home. So, of course,
Yeah.
now that the Switch is more widely available to the general public, so are several blog posts and YouTube videos featuring people putting the cartridges in their mouths to find out if they really do taste horrible. And it's true, they do. According to an article by Mike Fahey of gaming site Kotaku.com, which includes a video of him tasting several generations of Nintendo cartridges, immediately upon touching a Nintendo Switch cartridge, one's tongue is assaulted by a harsh bitterness that spreads like a brush fire through the mouth.
Wow.
Having a drink on hand helps, but not completely. The taste and how it spreads suggest that some sort of oily residue is left on the cartridge. And that seems to be the case. Several gaming sites, including Kotaku and Polygon, are reporting that Nintendo spokespeople have confirmed to them that a bittering agent called Denatonium benzoate has been applied to the game cartridge to avoid accidental ingestion by young children.
Well, that is really reassuring because when I saw the size of the cartridges, which are basically, like you said, an SD card size, they're really small.
Right, yeah.
So I wonder if Nintendo had similar problems with DS and 3DS cartridges, which I don't think are much bigger.
You're right. That's
things,
true.
Right?
So this guy taste tested those, and they didn't have the same result.
Okay.
Denatonium is the most bitter chemical compound known, and it's often sold under trade names such as Bitterant B, Bitter Plus, and Aversion. Dilutions as little as 10 parts per million are unbearably bitter to most humans and pets. It's used to prevent inappropriate ingestion of things like antifreeze. It's also used to break children of habits like nail biting and thumb sucking. All right, so that one seems to be true. And now here is the second rabbit hole. I saw a video on the Dan and Phil Games YouTube channel. These are two young British guys who create humorous videos about gaming, and they have over 2.5 million subscribers. In this video, they were, you guessed it, tasting Nintendo Switch cartridges with pretty funny results. Here's a clip.
It's like
Lick the cartridge. Suffer for views. This is what you deserve. Proper lick. No, big lick. Big lick, like a dog. Wait for it.
Oh, it took a while to arrive. Oh,
It gets worse.
oh my god. That's disgusting.
They actually did it.
Oh,
I can't believe
whoa,
Nintendo actually did that.
that's so gross.
I hope Pat's going to lick a cartridge for this.
An accent makes everything a bit more amusing.
So as I say, it's pretty funny, but here's what happens next in the video.
You didn't think that was all there is to this video, did you? We're doing real science here.
Oh, totally. Get ready for this plot twist.
I've still got some miracle berry taste-tripping pills.
For anyone that doesn't know what this is, can you explain the concept?
They make anything that tastes bitter or sour sweet. So I figure if we have one of these pills, we'll be able to find out what the true flavour of a Nintendo Switch cartridge is.
Just in case you missed it, what he just said was, I've still got some Miracle Berry taste-tripping pills.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any idea what he's talking about?
I took one after a recording of the reality check way back in the day.
Yep, me too.
Xander talked about this, and it was supposed to change the taste of, I don't know, lemon or citrus or something, and I don't remember the specifics, but it was kind of weird.
Yeah. Makes sour things not sour.
Right. So this is more commonly referred to as flavor tripping, and I had never heard of it.
Flavor tripping.
But this one seems to be true as well. Syncephalum dulcificum is a plant from West Africa. Its berries are often called miracle berries, miraculous berries, or miracle fruit. These berries contain a lot of a protein called miraculin that binds to taste buds and temporarily rewires how you perceive sour and acidic foods. Miraculin itself is not sweet. However, after the taste buds are exposed to it, which binds to the sweet receptors on the tongue, acidic foods which are ordinarily sour, such as citrus, are perceived as sweet. The effects can last up to an hour.
Wow.
There was an attempt to turn miraculin into a sugar substitute in the 1970s by a company called Marilyn. And there's an interesting conspiracy story about how the Sugar Association, the trade body representing, quote, big sugar in the USA, was involved in all sorts of cloak and dagger stuff like office break-ins and Maryland executives being followed. It's reported that the company had received information from the FDA that the product would be approved as generally regarded as safer grass. However, on the day of the product launch, the FDA determined that miraculin would be considered a food additive requiring years of further research and testing. And basically, they put the company out of business. Supposedly, no explanation was ever given, and the FDA documents obtained by Miraculin were heavily redacted. It's hard to know how much of this story is true, and I didn't dig into it very deep, but at least some of it appears to be based in truth.
Wow.
So now, miraculin seems to be used largely for recreational purposes, or flavor tripping parties. You can purchase either the berries themselves or tablets which contain an extract from the berries, which you dissolve on your tongue. The LA Times did a comparison test and concluded that the two are pretty much the same, but that the effect of the tablets wear off more quickly. There are a lot of videos of flavor tripping parties if you want to check them out. Here are some reports of what foods taste like. Lemons taste amazing, like sugary lemonade. Kiwis taste like blueberries coated in sugar. Guinness beer tastes like a chocolate milkshake.
Wow.
Honey is unbearably sweet. Other things that are supposedly interesting to eat at flavor tripping parties are mustard, anything pickled, pineapple, salt and vinegar chips, hot sauce, and shots of vinegar.
That's going to wreck your stomach.
And that was actually a point that Xander made, that if you're going to do this, which I actually recommend people do because it's very interesting as a sensation, be very careful of how much acidic things you're eating at once because it might actually have a negative impact on your stomach or other physiology.
Yeah.
I've never flavor tripped, but Speaking of confusion, I've had that sensation, don't know if you guys have, when I thought I was drinking one thing and I pick up a glass and it's something that I didn't think it was, and your brain just...
Right.
It's not that it tastes bad. Maybe it was apple juice, you thought it was Coke, and it just... It's confusing.
It's a surprise.
Yeah.
Very confusing. Yeah. Thanks, Pat, for exploring those two interesting topics, which turns out are not just empty gossip. Isn't that right, Adam?
Last week, Darren posted a video to our Facebook page. In this video, a couple of cartoon characters, one of which is meant to be Socrates, talk about gossip and a few rules to consider before spreading gossip. We'll get into those specific rules later, but one question was about its use, and this made me consider the purpose of gossip. First off, what is gossip? Wikipedia describes it as idle talk or rumor, especially about the personal or private affairs of others. This seems like a good enough definition. When we think of gossip, we think of someone secretly exposing some truth about another person, often stating something that this other person would not like you to hear. So what purpose does this serve, and how would we evolve it? We can use evolutionary psychology to think of ways in which gossip would have been evolutionarily adaptive for our ancestors. Unfortunately, there is no single agreed-upon school of thought on why we gossip. One idea suggested by evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar of the University of Oxford is that we need gossip to maintain social bonds. He compares gossiping in humans to grooming in other primates. Primates groom each other much longer than is needed to be effective. This appears to be a way for them to display commitment to each other. Gossip would be a way for humans to groom each other in a sense, and since gossip can be done at more than a 1-to-1 ratio than grooming, it's allowed humans to have larger social groups. I'm not terribly convinced by this explanation. It doesn't really give a why as to how gossiping first evolved. It simply gives a good use for it as sort of a secondary usage. We could say that patty cake could have been something that we evolved to replace grooming between humans.
And grooming itself could have value without any sort of gossip, right?
Yeah.
It's the grooming itself, the closeness, the trust, the picking out nits and other things out of your hair.
But we don't really do that to each other. Not in the same way. Klaus Superboy here of St. Andrews University has another explanation. As humans moved into the savannah, they needed to cooperate to hunt for food. This needed teamwork and information sharing. If the groups know about each other's abilities, they will be more well-suited to hunt and accomplish some task. This doesn't mesh too precisely with the kinds of gossip people do these days, but the basic idea does make sense, and I think this probably does tie into it. Zuberbu here does not believe that gossiping is an extension of our need to groom, as non-human primates do not similarly demonstrate cooperative behavior that doesn't meet their individual immediate goals as humans do. We humans can share information for a common goal that's in the distant future. Gossip could be a method of socially enforcing accountability and morality. So what that morality is would depend on the morality of those gossiping. If a behavior is frowned upon in a group, then a way to have others learn about it is through gossiping. This benefits those who gossip by exposing and punishing someone who might take advantage of them. This has an evolutionary adaptation of punishing freeloaders or those who have uncooperative behavior which would otherwise potentially undermine a group. So gossip is, in current society, often frowned upon. This will often relate to how one feels about the thing being gossiped about. If it's gossip about someone being sexually promiscuous, then someone who isn't bothered by such behavior won't really care for that gossip. That said, it isn't hard to see how gossiping about relationships and sexual exploits could be evolutionarily useful to us. If Jack has been going from hut to hut and wham bam thank you ma'am, perhaps I should not risk parental investment in him. If Jane has been making regular visits to Jack's hut, perhaps her interest is not in making a child with me, but in cuckolding me. And in this sense, cuckolding meaning when a woman gets a man who is not the father of her child to raise him. And this evolutionarily is something that comes into play. Also, if Joey isn't able to pay his bills or otherwise meet some sort of obligation, perhaps I should not be getting into business with him. The advantage to hearing gossip may be evident, but that advantage is less evident for the gossiper. Someone who gossips to me will gain favor with me, but not with the person being gossiped about, hence the secrecy. Will I be the next one gossiped about? Why would a person take the risk? Group selection in evolution isn't really a thing, so that's not a good way of thinking about how this would have been adapted for. But another way of thinking about evolution allows for cooperation to have evolved by thinking about reciprocal altruism, which gossiping could be a form of. So basically, if I do something for you and you do something for me, we all benefit from it, even if there is a bit of a cost to it. So in a relatively small social group, gossip seems to make some sort of sense, but what about on a large scale? Tabloids and gossip columns revel in celebrity gossip, and the public eats it up. If we care about gossip on a small scale, this explains why we would care about celebrity gossip. Just like watching a movie or playing a game isn't necessarily going to benefit me, it's a byproduct, like enjoying artificial sweetener or pornography. It's just something we evolve for something similar, and we sort of replace it with that. So for those who actively hate on celebrity gossip, consider the prevalence of similar types of gossip in other things. Social media these days seems to primarily revolve around gossiping about the Trump administration. Sure, this could serve a purpose as the public can be informed about his behavior and react to it, but this is not fundamentally different than gossiping about a neighbor's dirty laundry. It's just gossip about a different kind of transgression which different people consider to be important and relevant to them. Consider the discourse in the skeptical community whenever a prominent member does something which transgresses the social norms of the group. So much to say, I'm not going to excuse celebrity gossip and those kind of things, far from it. It serves little to no purpose and it hurts people. But as long as people find it compelling, it will exist, and it seems to have some innate interest in people for some kind of reason.
I thought that was great overall coverage, Adam. A bit of a, just so story, but I think I agree with the general plausibility of it because that's all we can do with evolutionary stuff. I do think, as you said, it's really the case where our brains are adapted to a previous environment, and so we can't help but still care about certain sexual taboos and what other people are doing, even though they definitely have no effect on our lives. We will never meet them, and it doesn't have good or bad effects. I do think maybe with Trump it could be a bit different because it could affect their lives in a more direct way than the neighbor's dirty laundry might in an indirect way.
Right. So this is So if you rationally think about that kind of gossip does have a benefit. So we can have a more calculated sort of reasoning saying, and so for some of the other stuff I mentioned too.
Right.
Absolutely.
It could be like, well, Trump is like the dominant male in a way in a tribe, in a way, but what he's doing might affect you through different social policies and whatnot.
Yeah. So I guess useful gossip, whatever you want to call it. So it's a similar kind of behavior, maybe a similar kind of interest, but yeah, you can maybe excuse it a little.
And exercise for the listener to think about the difference between gossip and any sort of information sharing. Because if we lump everything under gossip, that gets a bit wide as a concept too. Yeah,
so definitely those other examples I gave did not fit the original definition that I gave earlier in the segment. I'm very aware of that. So this brings me to the original video, which I wanted to briefly discuss. The video was originally posted to the Ayurveda Facebook page, also known as Curejoy. This is like a natural news of Facebook pages, which doesn't usually post much that's any good. So the story is Socrates talking to a man who has gossip to share with him. Socrates suggests that he applies these 3 rules, and if the thing is neither true, good, or useful, he says it isn't worth sharing. This was shared 200,000 times on Facebook. Now, I thought this was a bit dumb when I thought about it. We're fans of the truth. To me, this seems the most relevant thing. The other 2 criteria seem a bit useless to me, which makes the test a little silly. True but bad and useless, to me, is still trivially important. False but good and useful, I don't really see the point of that. So if various permutations of this are or aren't useful, then the rules don't seem to have any real value because you're not being able to apply them with some consistency. But Darren, you seem to think the test was good. I'd like you to sort of share your thoughts.
Yes,
and maybe
I'll elaborate. It also gives some insight into for listeners to know that when we post stuff to Facebook on our page, we typically do so individually. We don't check with everyone else first. And I thought this had value. Adam did not think it had value. Pat and Christina can chime in a moment. So I like the idea of thinking, is something true, is something good, and is something useful. Mm-hmm. Now, as an individual, I can extrapolate and think I can evaluate the claim, something good, true, useful, in almost any way, in any order I want. But typically, the first thing we care about on the show is it true, and then if it is or if it isn't. And of course, we also know from our skeptical way of looking at things that rarely is anything 100% true. In fact, nothing is. So there'd be some sort of degree. But even getting an average person to think about that, is it true about gossip, I think is very useful. And then in my world of maybe a bit of utilitarian leaning, usefulness and goodness might also come into play. So I'm sometimes thinking like, okay, someone might have a belief that I don't consider true at all. I can think of a homeless man I met who is a devout believer in God. I don't think that's true, but for him, it seems to be very useful. and it has some sort of goodness. I'm not then going to debate him on the street and say, by the way, let me take away the God thing, which seems to the only reason you have hope in your life. So that's something that I don't think is true, but it has goodness and utility to him. I can think of, there's numerous other examples where you could imagine something that's not really true, but maybe it's good and useful. As well, one of the points I made to Adam offline is that different things will work for different people. So the people who listen or read that Cure Joy page typically wouldn't be our listeners. No. But if you could get the people who gossip, who are concerned about celebrity gossip or even stuff about their friends they don't know is true, just to ask themselves, is this true? Is this helping the world? Is that useful? Maybe they would actually reduce it. Also, it can be something you ask yourself before you tell someone something else. There's so many things I think I probably say all the time, like, wait a minute, I don't even know if that's true. And really, am I contributing to the great public debate by saying, you know what this celebrity did? You know, I heard Ben Affleck doesn't want to be Batman. You're like, well, okay, is this like idle emptiness in terms of conversation? Well, it partly is, and you can decide if it is or isn't, but I think it doesn't hurt to be a bit more reflective.
It wasn't so much the content of the video for me, it was the source. And I know we also had an offline discussion about this, but to me, I mean, that video is posted by so many other sources that I kind of flinch when I see what the source is and it's on our page, if that makes any sense. Like, I would never post something from Goop. It wouldn't matter if it was actually a true scientific story. I would try to source out something that we know is legitimate, that we can rely on to post. So that was the only thing that I
which is interesting, like, right? So that goes to whether the truth of something versus the source, and then I guess the associated connotations with that. Because for us, the truth of it matters, and just look at the source. That's, I think, the genetic fallacy, as I mentioned before. But maybe you're worried about us giving them legitimacy, which is more of a strategic concern as opposed to truth concern.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. And I guess going back to the video itself, Darren, I sort of watched the video and my takeaway was like, if one of these criteria is true, then I want to know about it. I never thought about it in terms of all three of these criteria need to be true, because I think if you break down any two of those criteria, it's probably something I want to know.
And that's your perception, and I think that's fine too. I also think like Socrates probably didn't do this, right? Like,
no, I couldn't find any evidence.
So like we can actually analyze. Well, actually, so here's the thing: we can analyze the video itself by the video. I'm like, is it true that Socrates says? Probably not. Is it good? I think so. Adam doesn't. And is it useful? That's also mixed, depending on who you ask on the panel. And so I'm fine with that too, that different filters to navigate the world will be useful for different people. So I might actually try to apply this, and if I find after a month or two it isn't useful, I can come back and tell you that.
So last November, we got the following email from Checker Sarah. In the wake of the Chattanooga school bus crash, I'm seeing a rise in concern about buses and the lack of seatbelts on most of them. Here are some questions I have. Why don't most school buses have seatbelts? Would seatbelts increase safety in theory and in practice? Would kids incorrectly wearing a seatbelt increase injuries versus decreasing injuries? Would the cost and the added burdens of retrofitting buses be worth it overall? Do places that require seatbelts on buses have a decrease of injuries and fatalities versus places that don't? Well, those are all super interesting questions, and I'll cover what I can in the few minutes I have. As always, I'll have links in the show notes for anyone who wants to do some more robust digging on the topic. So my son took a school bus for a couple years when he attended a all-French public school outside of our zone, and I admit I worried about it quite a bit. It seems logical that if kids have to wear seatbelts and special booster seats in cars, why not buses that carry millions of kids to school every day? I love this kind of topic because it's something that really seems logical, but what seems logical may not make the most sense when you actually look at the facts. The incident that Sarah cites was a terrible accident in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It killed 6 elementary school students, and it resurfaced an ages-old debate regarding why school buses don't have seatbelts and would seatbelts make buses safer. A story from The Atlantic from a couple of months ago cites that in the U.S., federal law only requires seatbelts in school buses that weigh less than 10,000 pounds, but the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, has long rejected such federal mandates on coach buses and maintained that even without seatbelts, school buses are the safest mode of transportation for children. The NHTSA reported 1,191 crashes involving school buses or other vehicles functioning as school buses between 2005 and 2014. That makes up less than 1% of the 331,730 fatal collisions in that 10-year period. Among the 133 people who died each year on average in related crashes, only 11 were bus passengers or drivers. So a big reason for this is how buses are now designed. Before 1977, Indianapolis Monthly likened a child being subjected to a traffic accident while on a bus to, quote, placing an egg in a toolbox full of wrenches and gasoline, then throwing it down a flight of stairs and hoping it came out unbroken. Wow.
That metaphor served its purpose of being alarmist.
Yeah.
As Linda Poon reports in The Atlantic, when buses failed crash tests administered by UCLA researchers, the NHTSA ushered in new safety standards, including a fuel system integrity so that buses were less vulnerable to fires, strengthened roofs to prevent collapses during rollovers, and more significantly, the introduction of compartmentalization, which minimizes the impact of a collision by packing kids like eggs in a carton, basically.
Interesting.
Bus seats are also now made with energy-absorbing steel and given extra padding, and seats are bolted to the floor for added security, and the seat backs are also raised. Now, seatbelt advocates say this isn't enough to protect kids, and one of the largest studies, which was a 2010 pilot project conducted by the University Transportation Center for Alabama, found that seatbelts can, quote, provide some safety benefits, especially in preventing deaths during rollovers and side impact crashes. Crunching years' worth of crash data resulted in an estimate that seatbelts could reduce fatalities by 39% and injuries by 13%. But that translates to only around 8 injuries and 0.13 deaths prevented each year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, Adam.
Yeah.
Considering the cost to equip buses with seatbelts is estimated between $7,000 and $11,000, the researchers concluded that states are better off investing in other lower-cost safety measures. Adam Millsap, a research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University who studies state and local policy, adds that seatbelts would impact capacity per bus, so a school would need 4 buses instead of 3 to accommodate all of the kids. Here's a quote from Millsap. If a school lacks the resource to buy that extra bus, it could mean more children walking to school or riding with a friend. So we could actually see an increase in fatalities for young children. So he brings up a really interesting point because NHTSA finds that 3/4 of all fatalities related to school buses were pedestrian children. Here in We the North Territory, safety experts, including the Canada Safety Council, do not believe seatbelts on school buses would improve safety and maintain that there is no compelling scientific evidence that lives would be saved. Transport Canada and our provinces do not require school buses to have seatbelts, and also maintain that buses are still safer than a car with seatbelts. According to Transport Canada's National Collision Database, there were 3,684 injuries and 11 deaths in crashes on school buses in Canada between 2003 and 2012. In that same time frame, there were nearly 1.34 million injuries and 22,397 deaths in crashes on Canadian roads in all other vehicles. According to David Carroll, legislation and safety consultant to the Ontario School Bus Association, quote, a child is 16 times safer riding to school in a school bus than riding to school in a family car. In an email statement to Globe and Mail, Roxanne Marchand, a senior media advisor with Transport Canada, says, quote, this is because compartmentalization protects passengers in a crash.
16 times more safe.
Yep.
Wow.
And indeed, Transport Canada applies around 40 safety standards to the design and construction of school buses made in and imported into Canada, including specialized brake systems, escape hatches in the roof, and high padded seat backs that can cushion crash impact, which we heard about earlier. So if the numbers play out that kids are pretty safe on buses, wouldn't seatbelts make them safer? David Carroll says not necessarily. Seats would have to be redesigned with stiffer seat backs to support 3-point belts, which are combination lap and shoulder belts, and that's the only type of seat belt Transport Canada and the NHTSA recommend are best for buses. Says Carroll, with firmer seat backs, you no longer have the same protection in that compartment, so any kids who are wearing seat belts won't be as protected in a crash as they are now. The Canada Safety Council is on the same page and says research shows lap belts could actually increase the risk of head injuries in a head-on collision, which is the most common type of bus collision, and concur that 3-point belts require stiffer seats and potentially increase injury to students who are not buckled up. So add to that trying to enforce every kid on a bus wearing a seatbelt, that in order for seatbelts to be effective, they need to be adjusted properly for each kid's size, and in emergencies, they can hinder evacuation.
Oh, yeah.
So although there are no plans to change the rules for school buses, Transport Canada has required that 10% of seats on new school buses have latches for child seats for smaller kids up to 4.5 years old or 18 kilograms. In the US, the NHTSA is voicing support for 3-point seatbelts, requiring them on newly built minibuses, estimating that nationally seatbelts can save about 2 students' lives each year. They also continue to study whether seatbelts should be mandatory on all school buses, and many states are considering legislation requiring newly purchased buses be equipped with seatbelts. The reality check? School buses have an excellent safety record, and children who walk to school or use other forms of transportation are actually at a higher risk of injury than traveling on a school bus. So there you go. Thanks, Sarah, for sending in that email.
And thank you, Christina. I often wondered about this. I really did. When I was a kid, older kid, recently. Yeah. Thank you for joining us once again, listeners. Pat told us about the interesting world of Nintendo Switch cartridges, which you shouldn't lick because they taste terrible. And also Miracle Berries, which could give you a nice flavor-tripping experience. Adam explored the realm of gossip, its possible social uses, and we had a little discussion about how we post things on Facebook and whether they're true, good, and useful, and if that is itself true, good, and useful. And Christina exploded the idea that school buses need seatbelts. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Takes.
Klaus. Okay, I got to take a chance at this one. Zuber, buoy here.
Or $1, depending on how you look at it. The researchers concluded that...
Sorry, this is an inside joke.
That's an old
gag
throwback.
on the show.
It's a TRC joke. You wouldn't get it.
Well, this one's going to take me a few minutes, hours to edit.
A few fucks hours.